What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another round of, well, this is like the second to last one or second to last chapter that we'll be covering because there are 23 chapters within the Nasm study manual. So here we're going to get into exercise modalities. Pretty easy topic to kind of talk about, more about exercise equipment and the use of specifics for your resistance training and just the general differences between what we're going to be working with. So just kind of go with the flow here and just remember that there's always differences when it comes to what you're working with, what tools you're going to be working with. So there's always a high level of interchangeability. So let's do it. Chapter 22, Introduction to Exercise Modalities. All right, so with this modality part, like we said, it's tools. Devices or tools to enhance an exercise or movement to create a desired outcome by their inclusion. So really the main thing with modalities is just being more, I want to say, more creative in your approach. Always using dumbbells, always using kettlebells, always using body weight. We have to be aware that those other tools can provide the same stimulus, but it makes it more fun, more enjoyable. It keeps retention, that word that we want to keep people to stay around on. So it's just we have to keep going with different things and always providing a good stimulus and a good intended outcome, but also to keep it more enjoyable for everybody so that they can stay with it, but also maybe get like a slight stimulus change because of the movement being the same, but with a different tool, it can maybe spruce it up a little bit. So what we always have to always remember, and we always talk about, that safety component, but that relays directly into risk versus reward, right? Just because something looks cool and may have like this awesome presentation on what it is it really worth it? That's the key there. It's like, just say that it's the newest, greatest invention, or it's something that you've never used before, but it looks super, super cool. Doesn't mean it's always a good reward in the outcome. The risk of trying something new, it's there, but let's look at the reward of, will your client, patient, or athlete get it, right? So we just have to understand that because of these modalities, it's like, okay, just because it sounds good or you've read that it was better, is it? Look into it, try it yourself. Those are always things that we want to kind of work with. So first modality that we get into are strength training machines. I'm perfectly honest with you. I am not a huge advocate of machines. It's something that I'm not a fan of, but just because I say that, they serve a very good purpose for many different people. All right. So what's the key to them? Machines are more isolated in function. They provide, like it says, they provide a fixed plane of motion for specific movement. They're more for isolation than they are for like a true movement base, okay, which we know. All right. Resistance training, like it says, resistance is variable, so you can always change the resistance. It's just like taking a weight plate on and off of a barbell. It's designed for single or multi-joint fixed plane of motion. Now, with that said, multi-joint, yes, but it's still muscular isolation in its own self. The stability and the synergistic effect are, I feel, a little bit more diminished when it comes to machines versus if you're using free weights, whether that be a barbell, a kettlebell, a dumbbell, a medicine ball, a slam ball, or a D-ball. So it just depends on what you're using. But with machines, there are pros and cons. Take a look at that right bottom table and you'll see it. I do agree with the benefit part here, though. It's good for novice trainers, right? And those who lack stability or functional limitation or have functional limitations. That's important because those people may not work really well with free weights or accessory equipment. So this would be the way to get them to be able to train at a high level for what their level is and get the work they need to put in, even though they're not using free weights. So just because I don't have a high tolerance for them doesn't mean that they're not good for people. And it doesn't mean that if I'm working with a client, I'm never going to use machines. That would be false. And just because myself, with my own personal training for my own self, it doesn't mean that I'll never use a machine. It just, I use them sparingly. So that just, everybody has their own thing. But for me, that's kind of where I'm at. Free weights. Now you're starting to talk a little bit more of my own personal language. But again, this isn't about me. So we'll just kind of, but I hope you understand that when you go through your own training, like, you find your own way. And if you're a machine person, that's awesome. If you're a free weight person, that's amazing. So, free weights, barbells and dumbbells, straightforward, BBs and DBs. If you ever see them written out, like whenever I write a training plan, I always put, DB chest press or BB chest press or whatever it might be, just for quick little writing pieces. Now, with this here, it says the weighted objects with a constant mass and allows the individual to perform exercises in all planes of motion. You're not as limited with free weights as you are with a machine, because a machine, you can work in a certain plane of motion, but it's fixed to that plane of motion, and that's critical. With a free weight, you can move a little bit more freely, and it allows you to still do that single and multi-joint action. It allows you to go laterally and bilaterally or unilaterally, so double-sided or single-sided. It doesn't mean that you can't go bilateral or unilateral with machines, but you're again more limited with that. So one difference here, if you notice on the con side, is you do, for the most part, well, especially if you're the trainer, but for yourself as well, one of the cons you see there is a requirement of a spotter. Well, if you're a trainer, you're the spotter, so that doesn't really matter. But the risk versus reward here, if you're a person, if you're, giving, just say that you even do online training and you're giving people a workout to do on their own. Well, what if they go to the gym on their own and they don't have a friend there, a friend or a colleague or whoever? They might feel uncomfortable with a spot, trying to find a spotter. So that can be a concern when it comes to their risk versus reward. So always remember that. Now, potentially more dangerous, it's only dangerous if they're not taught the right technique. That's a problem. I will say, though, on that con side, it's intimidating for certain individuals. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it can be intimidating. There are many people that I've worked with that have expressed to me when I've worked with them that they don't like going over to the free weight section. They feel uncomfortable. And I keep telling them, you have to understand, although you may look at that and see someone that maybe you're intimidated by, sometimes those are your greatest allies because they're willing to help anybody. Not everybody has this pompous attitude, so we have to be able to kind of get rid of that stigma. Now, does that mean that there are people that are out there that are kind of jerks? Well, yeah, of course there are, but that's neither here nor there. It's just that, it can be intimidating from is what we're getting at. Cable machines. Different than what they talk about for strength training machines. Here we're talking more isolation. Cable machines are a little bit more freely movable. They're kind of like, in some way, you can still use them in a way of a free weight, but just on a cable base. I like cable machines. I think they serve a really good multi-purpose function. I feel like you can do a little bit more with them than you can with a traditional strength training machine. So there is that freedom of movement, which I do like. So, what is the benefits to this? Well, it's basically a lot of benefits that you find with free weights, and it's also a lot of benefits that you find with strength, with the strength training machines that you find. So it's kind of like a good combination. And this is a little bit less intimidating for others. They say moderate to advanced levels. Well, beginners can use this too. And if you notice on this picture, that down here, right below the person's hand and below the rope that the person's holding, there are a lot of explanations of exercises that people can walk up to and find. So sometimes you find those as well with these cable machines. Elastic resistance. Now, these here, you can see that this individual has the handle-based bands. You can get the ones that are non-handle based. You can have a lot of times they're using rehab, but the elastic bands that are they cut them into certain lengths. So there's always those as well. So it just depends. Now you have to understand though that what if it's an elastic band or a tube band, we have to be smart about knowing our levels. So typically it's color oriented and each color has a certain tension to it. So make sure that you pay attention to that when you start working with people, because you're like, oh, here's a band. No, not all bands are created the same. And I think you all understand that, but just kind of some food for thought. Now you see here that it says beginning to advanced level to rehabilitation. That's kind of what I was hitting on earlier. It's just a way for people to, again, single and multi-joint use, unilateral and bilateral. You can do one side or the other. You can do both at the same time. So there's a lot of, again, freedom of motion with this. I feel like resistance bands are kind of like cable machines, right? They just are not in a machine orientation. It's just they're there. And they have the good distribution of weight throughout the whole movement. I actually have used resistance bands to also offset the free weight use that I've had. So for example, I've actually taken a resistance band, put it behind my back, lay on it, and then grab the barbell on the bench press and, had it behind my back. So as I come down, it's adding resistance on my way up. So it just provides a different stimulus. Now, if know about chains or anything, it's very similar to that approach where you're adding some new leverage to your movement. So just, again, more information for you there. TRX rip trainers, I've used these before. I feel like they're okay. I feel like you can do a lot of the same stuff with bands. I feel like you can do a lot of the same stuff with cable machines. I feel like you can do a lot of the same stuff with free weights. This here is supposed to replicate like more of that, tension throughout a movement that's a little bit more freely movable. Your freedom of movement is higher. So that helps. And usually with the tension, as you get to that end range of motion, it becomes greater. It's just one of those things where I'm having a hard time with words here, because I feel like this is one of those things that has a really good marketing chip and that people will use them and buy them because of that. But I don't feel like it's necessary. You can do so many other things with this. Now, which brings me to the next point that it says right here. It's a resisted band trainer with a lever bar that is attached to a resistance band. Well, there's resistance band. That's the same as an elastic resistance. And it's a lever bar. That's like a cable. Okay. So there's some similarities. So it's like, okay, is it really worth it? Now, a TRX suspension trainer, I thought they might have had these in here right now, but with a suspension trainer, I think those are great. Those are rings, by using the suspended self. But this right here, kind of hit or miss for me. So again, it's just a piece of equipment that is out there that you can definitely be a part of. Don't limit your toolbox. You might be trying to do it on a band or a cable machine for the same movement that you could do here, but this seems more exciting for your people. Get one, have it in your facility and use it for that purpose to keep people more engaged, even though they could do the same thing on a different piece of equipment. Medicine balls, love me some medicine balls. Love the fact that you can do so many different movements with a medicine ball, and you can also do very advanced movements with a beginner with a medicine ball. Even just being able to squat a medicine ball and throw it overhead and have it land and come back down, you're starting to work on that power base or that explosive nature of training for somebody who may not be used to it. So there are things you can do with it. And then obviously you see the person at the top there using it as a slight instability and a little bit of offset training with that push-up base. You know, you can do that and then you switch hands. So now you're working on coordination and balance at the same time. You're working on stability because you're going to eventually move from one hand to, two hands to one hand, back onto two hands. There's a lot of cool things that you can do. So it is beginning to advanced levels. Definitely can go through all sorts of ranges of motion. You can do more sport-specific training. You can do more power-based. You can do isolation. You can do multi-joint. It's truly up to you. And that's why I think medicine balls and slam balls, or you might see them called D balls, D-balls. It just gives you more variety, and they're very, very good for, especially like I was saying, explosive training. The kettlebell training. We talk about this in the previous chapter when we talk about hinging. Now we can also use squatting. We can use pressing. So there's a lot of cool things when we talk about kettlebells. They're multi-purpose, right? It's very much like a dumbbell in terms of its use, its free weight use. Sometimes you'll see kettlebells labeled as accessory items. I personally think they should be labeled under free weights because that's what they are. But they're their own entity, and they're really an amazing tool. You can do so many things with them because of how the center of mass is on that off the handle, with the center of the mass being pretty much away from where your handle grip is, so it changes the dimension or it changes the stimulus a little bit because you have to be a little bit more under control. Now, one of the most critical movements that you can ever learn, especially when it comes to hip hinging, besides deadlifting, is, now they're using a single kettlebell down here, but a kettlebell swing. And if a person can master a kettlebell swing, there's nothing better, because a lot of things are applied around a kettlebell swing just because of the motion that it's under. So working with kettlebell swings really emphasizes the hip hinge, and that can become very beneficial when it comes to pretty much just being actively involved in any movement. So kettlebell swings, kettlebell training, get the person to get that, and then everything else follows suit. Program design, there needs to be a very specific checkpoint here. I'm looking at this picture and I agree with a lot of these. The problem is that you'll see, and let me just make sure it's not in the next one. Okay, nope. Here, if you look at the person and you see their checkpoints, right? This is the end range of motion because everything is going to go back, shove back. Now, common mistakes you'll see here are going to be a person with their feet. Their feet might be too wide. Get them to be shoulder width apart. They don't need to be any wider than that. The only reason why your feet need to go any wider is if you're going to use a heavier kettlebell, you may need more clearance between your legs. So that's one of the reasons why your feet might have to open a little bit. The knees, it says here, in line with the second and third toe. The basic premise to that is keep your knees in line with your toes, because that will be critical. They say second and third toe. That's just a lot of extra words for a person. Keep your knees in line with your toes. So if your toes are slightly flared, then your knees want to go in that direction. They don't always have to be pointing as straight ahead as possible. They might have a slight flare, maybe 1 to 2 degrees. The hips, excuse me, they're going to shove back, because when they shove back, that means the knee will bend itself ever so slightly. You are not purposely squatting. And that is probably one of the biggest critiques I have for watching people do kettlebell swings, is that they want to squat and then swing the kettlebell. That's not the way it's done. Not at all. We have to set our hips back and then shove our hips using our glutes and hamstrings to shove them forward, to then minimize the amount of shoulder pull that's required to get the kettlebell up. If you squat down and then come up with the kettlebell, that's going to put more emphasis on the shoulders this is going to be more of a hip functioning than it is a shoulder. The shoulders are more of the momentum filler. Okay. The key here is, just keeping everything, in order of respect of the movement. So the shoulders, like it says, neutral position or depressed, you really want to just have active upper back into that shoulder area. And then as you come through, you really want to, as the hips do their job and you finish the hip hinge forward, then you want to drive the shoulders up into that flex position. So that's why you don't want to have the rounded back. You don't want to let the, you don't want to have the rounded lower back. You don't want to have sagging shoulders. You want to keep everything active. And then your head with your, the cervical spine, like it says, in a neutral position. Personally, I like to say keep your head, don't tuck your chin, because that means people are going to put it at their chest. Just say, neutral head. And they're like, well, what's neutral head? Keep your eyes focused forward and keep your head in the same position and keep your spine straight. And people can kind of rationalize with that. With, they talk about ways of using kettlebells within the program design. Talking about phase 1, renegade rows. If you've never done a renegade row, either on a dumbbell or a kettlebell, God bless you. They're challenging. The only thing that I will say about this positioning here on the left-hand side is that as the weight gets heavier, a person is going to have more of a torque of their lower, or basically their whole back, and they're going to try to rotate their hips around as the weight gets heavier. So how do you offset that? If you see the front view here of this person in the orange shirt, how they're doing their renegade rows, if the weight gets heavier, what you can do, and it's not horrible for form because you're still paying attention to over here on the left, see how they're nice and straight. You want to pay attention to their the straight as an arrow position, and then if they need to, with the heavier weight, open the legs up a little bit more. There's nothing wrong with opening those legs up because you're going to need that leverage if the weight gets heavier. Now, beginners, not so much, but still, you want to maintain a straight posture even if your legs get a little bit more spread apart. So that's phase 1, just understanding the row, because remember, that's more about the stabilization. Phase 2, we're going to superset. We're going to do seated rows and renegade rows. That's pretty challenging on the system. Remember, it's A and B for that. And then phase 5, that superset is going to be, it says here, squat to overhead press with dumbbells, and then you're going to do kettlebell snatches. So again, that's power-based training, a little bit different than, than your traditional hypertrophy or strength-based training. That's more power-based because remember, that's supersetting as well. Body weight training, there's nothing wrong with body weight training, just overcoming gravity. I think sometimes in the land of training, we overlook body weight training way too much. Things like push-ups, pull-ups, just even high volumes of body weight squats and then sit-ups. I know that this here sounds ridiculous, but I think we look for, and I sometimes can fall in this premise as well, we look for the next greatest thing to come out. Well, let's be real here. Body weight training has been around since forever, and honestly, there's nothing wrong with it, and it should be included in some sort of daily, if not, some sort of higher amount of weekly use. Because if a person can move their body weight, pushing or pulling against gravity, then they'll be able to, number one, be more stable. They will be able to use their body in the correct manner. They'll be more balanced. They'll be more coordinated. But also, it'll help them to build some strength outside of that because they're able to move their body just as well. Some of the things that we do, that are different. If you ever try doing a handstand push-up is probably one of the toughest besides a pull-up, I think, in regard. I mean, there's other things too, but like in just general terms, handstand push-ups, inverted upside down against the wall, go down, tap your head on a pad, come back up. If you can do a strict handstand push-up without the use of your legs, that's a pretty good feat of strength because you're pushing against your body weight. And if you can lift your body weight in an overhead press, that's a pretty big feat too. Anything over that is amazing. So, those the pull-ups and the handstand push-ups and just regular push-ups, they're a really big feat of strength because it shows that you can move your body in the right way. Handstand push-ups and pull-ups in particular, because they're both vertical motions. One's more push, one's more pull. Suspended body weight training. This is what I was saying. You can use here. The TRX, you can use rings. All of these make a huge difference because not only are you using hands or feet to move yourself, but you can do it in a very vast array of motions, whether it be multi-planar, multi-joint, and then, like it says, proprioceptively enriched environments that, proprioception, knowing where you are in space, really understanding your body and how it can move throughout a lot of different ways. Also, because you have an advanced level of core musculature used, that helps with, that whole central, don't just say abs, but it helps with the whole centralized region of your body to stay more stable post-workout. But then you're trying to enhance the stabilization while you're moving. That increases the amount of calories you burn because now you're using other things, other aspects of just moving something up and down or forward and backward. And then it also can help with flexibility and mobility because sometimes you're going through a greater range of motion because your body is able to move being suspended versus being hooked to something or holding on to something. So again, another area that we want to focus on besides body weight training is suspended training because it can be good for anybody. So I don't care, bodybuilding. Have a bodybuilder doing, bicep curls. Put them on a TRX or a set of rings and have them do some body weight curls. We'll be talking by the end. If they're doing 4 sets of 12 to 15, God bless them because that's a lot. That's a lot to do, and it's a lot to, it's a lot of volume, but it can help with masking. You do 8 of those at one time, and you can feel it directly in your bicep because there's so much tension being used with your body weight. So there you go. There's your TRX on the left. You can see how you can use it in phase 1 and phase 2. Excuse me. Sandbags, love sandbags. Sandbags or the ball version, you can use either one. Similar to medicine balls in the regard, they're asymmetrical loadings because they're not symmetrical, meaning that they're not shaped accordingly to be even. So that assists in a little bit more core musculature activation. It helps with synergistic approaches. It helps with coordinating your synergists and your prime movers. It helps with your stabilizers. So instability at its finest, and it helps you to be able to work on things like carries, lifts, throws. All these things make a difference. And you can do a lot of movements that you would do with a dumbbell or a kettlebell or a barbell with a sandbag, and it just, again, very, very appropriate. Now, I don't agree with solely this term, but ideal for HIIT. It's not just for high-intensity interval training. It can be used for strengthening as well. So don't assume that it is ideal, but don't assume that's the only reason why you're going to use it. Now, VIPRs, or there's, these are one of the things that I've used for the first time a couple years ago, and actually down here, they're referred to as RAMs and the Spartan Deca. That's actually the first time I ever used one of these because they're kind of like they're almost like a PVC pipe, but they have some handles on them. They're kind of like a log, a smaller log, and usually they're made out of rubber. They have handles on them. They have some good weight to them, and they're a little bit more, I want to say more advanced because of the style that you use them for. So a beginner person could use them. They'd have to just do really lightweight. I like it because it just provides a different stimulus to a movement. Like this person's doing a lunge here. This is probably one of the greatest things you can do with these besides doing like a clean and press or you know, some other bent over rows. You know, there's a lot of things that create instability with this as well, because you know, you're having to change grip, you're having to move your hands, so it's a little bit more taxing on the system, and it can create a little bit more of that, again, core stability usage, and creating that stabilization within the whole core region. But again, introduce these early with simple movements and then promote more challenging later on, because it says advanced levels for some clients. And it's something, again, that you can work with someone who, you know, keep it exciting and entertaining and engaging. Battle ropes. Battle ropes are good for just a higher heart rate. You know, you could take them or leave them. I found more articles recently talking about what's the carryover to battle ropes. They've been used for a long time now. They do help with coordination of, you know, hand and arm. But where the carryover is to like sports specific training, it's more of just calorie burn. So I agree with some of these people that are talking about, like, you know, why use them when you can do other things. You know, again, they're just, you know, if people enjoy doing them, don't stop. It's, again, another way to increase the metabolic demand of your system, because it does get you going. Your heart rate goes through the roof. So, but if you're using them sports specifically, then make sure you're using them in the motions and the manners that a person would be moving, more so than just simple ups and downs. Okay? But don't dismiss them just because I'm talking about the carryover aspect. Do not dismiss battle ropes. So with all that, all right, here comes a little bit more of the proprioceptive premise. Stability balls. And if you all have seen stability balls, you all know they look like this. Okay? Here's a good way to fit people. Okay? The suggested sizes are on the right based on height. And if you own a facility and you're going to be more of this style of training, or if you have a few in your facility just because, make sure you have a good range of sizes, because it's not one size fits all. And that's pretty obvious. If you're a 75 centimeter ball, a 5 foot person might not be able to, they might be able to barely touch the ground, and then they're not in optimal position. So that's critical for that. But understand that stability balls need to be used correctly, because you have to be able to place them in the right manner and fit the person for them to be able to do certain things. Stability balls, I can take them or leave them. If you're doing things like this, I think this is really good for rehabilitation and for people that are in that early onset of training, because it helps them with stabilizing. But as you get more advanced, I don't see the need for somebody to be doing a chest press on a stability ball if they're a more experienced lifter. It's really not doing them any service, especially if they're trying to gain strength, because it just, you can't get yourself into the positioning that you need to, because it's unstable, number one. Number two, it can only hold certain weight. And number three, because you're unstable, you can't reach max loads. So it's very critical that you think about the specificity of what you're doing to then use this accordingly. So there's your guidelines. I'm not going to go through them here, but, you know, just press pause, take a look at them. There might be a couple of questions that you see. Maybe one question about stability ball guidelines on your test, but, you know, it just go through them, make sure you understand them. It's very simple, because the guidelines are very simple, you know, versus other equipment, like especially the first one. Make sure you're inspecting them just like anything else, okay? But just pause, take a look at them. If anything sounds unusual, just ask a question. You know, feel free to go into the comments and ask a question. Bosu balls, half stability ball, pretty much the same rationale that I have for a stability ball, I have for a Bosu ball. Okay? One of those things where they are good for people, again, getting rehabilitation, phase 1, phase 2. But other than that, again, if you're, again, a more experienced lifter, you shouldn't be doing squats on these with a barbell and having some added weight. It's just not necessary. TerraCore's very similar to a Bosu in some sort of way. It does have that rubber bladder, so it's kind of like just an oblong Bosu, so same premise. Teach their own, but again, if you're trying to provide a different stimulus for a lot of people, like it says here, boot camp, small groups, and individuals, just individual training, have at it, but you're going to be limited if you're working more with a lot of experienced lifters because they're beyond that instability. Fitness trackers, so kind of shifting gears here. I'm all about fitness trackers. I have an Apple Watch. I've had a few Apple Watches. I've had a Fitbit. I've had a Fitbit. I've had Apple Watches. Never owned a Garmin. I'm just trying to think of other things here, but understand their fitness trackers are estimates. They're not exact, so take it for what it is. But I think they're really appropriate because it gauges you on a way to self-analyze what you're doing, self-evaluate yourself in the process. I use them a lot, because of a higher intensity training that I'll do. I use it to see where my heart rate gets to. And then if I'm like on a rest period or just say I have rest between sets, I'm curious to see what I recover back down to. And if my recovery is diminishing, then I know that it's becoming more taxing and I got to figure out a new system. So they're for everybody. But the benefits on the bottom, motivation, accountability, accuracy, and some people might need them for medical purposes. They serve a lot of different needs. If you look on the right, the features there, step counters, so accelerometer, calorie counter. It's a movement reminder. I know the Apple Watch tells me if I've been sitting for too long, like if I'm doing a lot of desk work, tells me to get my butt up off the chair and get moving around. Heart rate monitoring, love that aspect. GPS, Apple does a pretty good job with that. I think Garmin is probably one of the highest rated for GPS base, just for tracking purposes. I love the sleep tracking aspect. Let's see. Apple does a pretty good job with it. I don't know how accurate theirs is, but it kind of gives a pretty good input. I know Whoop does a really good job with sleep tracking, but again, they're all estimates. Battery life, Apple probably has one of the worst battery lives, but it just, there's so many other features you have with it, it just drains it out. Fitbit has a really good battery life. Whoop has a really good battery life. Garmin's have a really good battery life. So it just depends on what you're looking for, and are they waterproof? If you're going to be a swimmer, that's important. The other thing too is activity recognition. Not every wearable fitness tracker can recognize specific activities. If you're doing resistance training, you might not be able to, it might not work the same as if you're, from one device to another. So if you're going to get something, do your research and don't just fall for the marketing trap. Get what you need. So that's critical for when you're talking about fitness trackers in that regard. Fitness and nutrition apps, I love it for the accountability factor. Meal planning wise, counting calories, food labels, all these things, tracking macros, tracking micros. Sometimes it's a way to, it's really good for making healthier choices. But the bottom line here is they're all really used to make sure that you're on the right track. And this bottom one here, forming positive eating habits. I think that's critical in the whole process. Anything to help you to get on track and stay on track better is great in my eyes. Different thing, there's a lot of factors that you can work with. You can pause it here and just look at them, but a lot of these, it can help with, but again, it's more about this one aspect here, forming positive eating habits. If it's for fitness, it's it's going to form positive habits for training, and it's going to be a way that you can look into certain things for proper exercise technique. It can give you some sort of one-on-one basis if you need to. So there's a lot of cool things that come with these fitness apps now where it's not just plug in what you did for the day. It's like, no. Look at Apple Fitness, for example. You can have your phone out in front of you, and you can be watching what they're doing on your phone while you're doing it. So like you could do it in your office at your job and then go right back to work. It's crazy. So there's a lot of really cool aspects that have come from these fitness apps that they've become more creative and they've become more expanded in what you can do with them. Heart rate monitors, these are probably the most accurate of the trackers when it comes to measuring heart rate. Now, your Apple Watch, your Fitbit, your Garmin, all those things have, a Whoop. All these things have different, aspects to them where you can track your heart rate, but the chest strap seems to still be the most reliable when it comes to research wise that we're seeing. The chest strap is still most reliable. I will say though that as we go year to year to year, the wearables, more like the watches and the wristwear, they're starting to catch up in terms of reliability. They're not they're not accurate to 100%, but they're pretty close. Chest straps, they're not accurate to 100%, but they're pretty close. So we're starting to get to that point. Now, the one that I see here that I'm unsure of, and I've seen a lot of like low reliability with them, are the rings, like the Aura ring, for example. I'm not meaning any disrespect to these companies. It's just that one's not as reliable. But if you're a person who's looking just to stay accountable, it's a good option. So just remember that part of it. So it's not just about the highest reliability, but we're talking about accountability and what's more convenient for somebody. Now I know, like I with my wedding ring, I can't work out with it on because it hurts my finger when I'm holding a dumbbell or a barbell. So my wife is the same way. She takes hers off as well. So like with an Aura ring, I could not have that on me because it just would not work. So you have to think about what's best for you. But with heart rate monitoring, the chest strap is still very, very accurate. And we've talked about HRV, heart rate variability. Heart rate monitors are the best way to measure HRV, or measuring your variability of your heart rate and your rhythm of your heart rate based on, if you're going to have like an Apple Watch or, anything along those lines, the chest strap is the best way to go for that. But everything seems to be improving and getting better year after year. So eventually it'll just become where we don't even need to worry about it anymore. So, but again, this chapter is really kind of cool. Dives into that, the modalities piece. I think this is one of the cool chapters because there's so much to it, because it expands your toolbox. So don't ever underestimate your toolbox. All right. So this is chapter 22. Thanks again for listening, as always. And if you're still listening now, I've said it in the previous chapter, chapter 21, because these are some of my newer videos. Feel free to leave a super thanks by clicking on the little sandwich tab and going down to super thanks. And feel free to donate to this cause, trying to expand things, trying to make things more exciting for the Dr. Jeff Williams YouTube channel. Hopefully transferring that over to the Dr. Jeff Williams other social medias. And then obviously my own personal love is the Exercise Science Institute, which is my own creation. And we're just trying to expand and make things better for you all outside of just these videos here. So thanks again for listening. I appreciate anything, and leave comments, feedback. Do you want to know specifics within the chapter? We can dive into a separate video on that. So just feel free to leave comments, questions, whatever, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you for your time and your patience with these videos. I hope they work for you. But here it is, signing off. Dr. Jeff Williams. Have a great day.